So in the last video, we went over how to throw errors or return errors back to the user or the client. Now the next step with this is to detect more errors. So the other thing that could go wrong is if they give us a bad email or a bad password. So we want to validate both of those fields. And the thing that I like to use to validate this is something called yup. And what it does is you create basically a little schema of what you expect the type to be, and then if it gets messed up, it throws an error, and we're just going to return that error to the user. So we're going to install this, and then I'll show you how it works. So let's go ahead and just do yarn add. We also need to add the types for it, so we could add them first if we wanted to. So we're going to add them as a dev dependency, and then at types yup. And then after this, we're going to install yup itself. So yarn add yup. Alright, so we have the library added. I'm going to go ahead and import it here. So import and as yup from yup. Okay, so we're going to create a schema right here. And what you do is you first say what type of schema you're going to be making. So for us, it's going to be an object. And I'm going to say .shape. And here we're going to specify the shape of the object that we expect. And so what I mean by that is we have an arguments, email and password. So this is an object. So we expect to have two fields, an email and a password. So email, and the email is going to be of type yup string. And I want to have a min length of, let's say, 3 characters and a max length of 255. And this 255 max is also matching what we set in the database for our entity. Okay, I can also specify I want it to be an email. So you can see I have very quickly just set up basically a schema for this email. These are all the properties I expect. So I expect it to be a string, I expect it to be at least the length 3 and a max of 255, and an email. Now I can also do the same thing for the password. Yup string. It's going to have a min length of, say, 3 as well, and a max length of 255. This 255 is more for make sure we're not hashing something forever. We don't really care that if you have a really, really long password, we're fine, but 255 is we're going to cut it off. It's good to have like hard caps on everything. Okay, so we have like this schema thingy here now. Next we're going to do is basically validate this argument against this schema to make sure it fits. And now we're using strings and stuff. This also works for integers and booleans and other types, and we'll see that as we do more validation in this series. So first thing I'm going to do is change this to args. So I'm going to call this args, and then down here I'm going to just email password is equal to args. And so the reason why I am moving it down here is before I basically destructure the arguments, I'm going to validate the schema. And the way you validate it is by calling validate on it. And you'll notice how I'm setting up a try catch block. And the reason for that is validate will throw an error if it goes wrong. So we're going to wait. We're going to say schema. So that's what we called it right here. And I'm going to say dot validate. And I'm going to pass in my value with its arguments. So args, we're validating against this schema. And I'm just going to console log the error and show you guys what this thing looks like. And I like to use an option called abort early and set that equal to false. So if I set that to true, the first time I encounter an error, it's going to stop. But really I'd like to show all the errors. So for example, if there's something wrong with the email and something wrong with the password, I'd like to see that, and I want to see that error. Okay, so let's go over to the test and now mess this up. So not a user, but a register test. So I'm going to make this a really short password. So it's 2 characters long. And let's go ahead and just run yarn test, and we should be able to see that console log statement to see what this error looks like. And then from there we're going to format that error in the format we want and then return it. So here we can see here's the object that it gave us, and we can see we did get a validation error, which is exactly what we expect. And then we have the inner object here, and inner object is really what we're going to be grabbing, and we're going to turn this thing into what we want to return. So this is basically the same shape. We're going to grab the path and grab the message, and that's what we're going to return. So here the path was password was bad, and the message was password must be at least 3 characters long. Let's also try this on the email, and you can kind of see what this would look like. So this is a bad email, and we can run that again. And if we come back over here in our resolvers, so what we're going to do is take this error, format it, and that's going to return back to the user. And the other thing is, you might not like the message here. So alright, so here we see the message. Email must be at least 3 characters, email must be a valid email. So it's breaking a couple rules, right? So what we're going to do is pass this back, basically this object. But let's say we don't want email must be 3 characters or whatever, right? You can pass as a second parameter like bad length. You know, you can say whatever you want to, and it's going to go ahead and take that message. So you can go through and customize the errors or the messages very easily as well. So we see it says bad length now instead of what it was before. I'm happy with what the default messages say though, so I'm going to just keep it like this. Okay, so I'm going to add a utils function. So I'm going to say format yup_err.ts. I'm going to just export const format yup_err, and what I want to do is just return from the resolver after this. So I'm going to say return format yup_err, passing in our error. Okay, so then over here we're going to take an error, and this is a validation error, and this is coming from yup. And what we want to return is an array of errors, and this is going to take be a certain type. So the type of these errors, and we can just look at our schema over here, is we want to return, well, I guess this is in shared, so we're going to return an array of error, and error is going to have a path and it's going to have a message. So we look right here, we're going to basically take each validation, grab the path, grab the message, and then get rid of the rest, and that's all we need. So for errors here, I'm going to say an array, and then it's going to have a path, which is a string, and a message, which is also a string. So then we're going to say error.inner, and we're going to just loop through each one. So for each error, we're going to say errors.push, and we're going to add a new one on, and we're just going to grab, so path is going to be e.path, message is going to be e.message, and at the very end we're going to return errors. So this is us just like cleaning up the error object that we get back and kind of getting rid of all these extra fields that are on this object, and it's a validation error, not just a plain object. Okay, so now we should be passing back just a plain vanilla object that looks nice, and now hopefully our test should be failing because we're no longer passing back a good response, at least to this user. Let's go back to our resolvers. So because we're returning early now if we get a bad validation error. So perfect. So instead of returning null, which means we successfully registered a user, we returned an array of this object. And we can see we have 3 errors here. 2 of them have to do with the email, 1 of them with the password, and we can see wrong characters, must be valid, and then must be 3 characters for the password as well. Okay, so let's write some test cases for this. So we come over here to register, and I just want to just undo and put this back to what it was before. Perfect. So after we do these tests, I want to do a third. So here we're check for duplicates, and maybe let's write a little comment. Test for duplicate emails. And here we're just gonna, up here, the first one we did, check, make sure we can register a user. And then next thing I'm going to do, catch bad email. So here is our mutation. So instead of just mutation like this, I want to make mutation a function. So it's going to now take two parameters, an email and a password, and that's what it's going to return, a string with these. And I'm assuming because it's shadowing, yeah, so I'm just going to call this E and P. We'll say E, oops, and P. And both of these are going to be strings. So mutation here, I'm going to pass an email password, and same thing here. But then down here, when I call mutation, this is going to be response 3. I can keep the same password, so this is going to be a valid password and a invalid email. So that's what that's going to be. And really here, I'm not checking to make sure yup works. I'm checking to make sure I'm returning the right response. So for example, the email is wrong. So I want to make sure with the response, I'm seeing an error that tells me the email is wrong. So with response 3, we're going to just check this. So again, I expect to have it a length of 1. That's perfect because I have 1 error. And now I want it to tell me the exact same thing. So right here, I should have a problem with the email, right? Now we have a problem with like the length of the email. And so maybe it's worth putting in the error message or checking the error message here to make sure it differentiates between a duplicate email. Because right now we're doing the same check and this check works. But I want to make sure we actually get a bad password response, and here we get a duplicate email response. So in my resolvers, maybe what I'll do is create a file called errormessages.ts, and we'll export const duplicate email, and this is what we're going to say when we get a duplicate email. Already taken. Duplicate email. Okay, so now we have this over here, duplicate email, and that's what we're going to be returning in our resolver. So now in this check right here, I want to actually just confirm that what this guy equals. So now I'm going to say the path is equal to that, and now the message is equal to duplicate email. So before I wasn't doing this because I was like, if I refactor the message, it's going to break this code, right? But now, since I'm splitting up the error message into its own TypeScript file, when I change it here, both the resolver is going to return something different, and when we test it over here, I don't have to now change the test case. So I want to do like the same thing over here. So I'm going to say export const email to email not long enough. And I'm actually just going to copy the error message because I'm happy with what this error message says. And now in our resolvers, we'll use that. So email not long enough, and then also now in our test. Oops. And I guess maybe we can test this a little bit different, and we'll discuss that after we type this out. So message, and this is going to be email too short, or not long enough. Can't find the name. I think I just need to import it. There we go. So both of these I auto imported, so just make sure you guys are following along. This is from error message. Got both of those. Okay, so let's run this and make sure this works. So here on test, and we can see what's going wrong, if anything. And then the next thing I want to try is passing an array. Okay, so email, oh, I received two error messages. That's fine. So the first one, so really what I want to say here is twofold. So I want to just actually expect the whole object. Expect response 3 equal to. So let's just make sure this works. So I expect to get back an object that says register, and register returns an array. And in this array, the first element should be this guy. And we can copy that. Well, really, just this. And the second one, object in this array, should be invalid email. And we'll add that as our error message. And we'll copy that same error message. And then in our resolver, we'll say invalid email. Alright, so then we update our test to look like this. And I think this will be a nice way to do it. So do yarn test, and we'll check this out, make sure the objects do match, because we're actually getting 2 errors back. And cool, so that looks good. Next thing I want to check for is a bad password. So we'll copy this. So this case will be when we get a good password, or sorry, a good email, but a bad password. So like that. So we expect one thing back, and the path should be password, and the message should be bad password, or password not long enough. We'll call that. So let's add that error message. Password not long enough. And let's copy what that error message will be. Cool. And we'll use that in our resolver. And now in our test, we'll just need to import this, and then we'll run this to make sure that works. And then while it's running, I want to make one last test, and that is when we both have a bad password and a bad email. So catch bad password and bad email. So this will be email, and I'm just going to do like that. So too short and we can copy these 3. Now the order might be off is the only thing. So I don't know how I want to do this to make sure. I guess this is fine for now, but what happens if this array returns back password is the first element? I'm still happy with that, but it would say the test failed. Alright, so this test passed. We'll do yarn test again. I guess I could sort this maybe. I think for now it should return it in this order every time, so it shouldn't be a problem. And alright, so yarn test passed. So now we're doing 3 tests, which I'm pretty happy with, making sure just the email is bad, just the password bad, and here is the email and password bad. And here's us each time. We're just making sure we get the right error messages back now. And we made a new file over here called error messages that is now just going to hold all our messages for errors. And then our resolvers over here, we're using this and returning back this formatted error before we do anything else. We validate it. You'll notice I did not add it to, like, for example, Max. I'm not testing Max. I'm fine with that. I'm fine testing. I know Yup is going to work. Yup should be testing their code to make sure their stuff works. I just want to double check and make sure that I am indeed getting an error message back. So I know min works, so I expect to get a good error message back with Max. If I wanted to, I could also add some test cases for Max, but I think it's overkill in this case. So that's it for this video, guys. And this is how I'm going to be doing validation for other stuff as well, is setting up a Yup object like this. And another thing I didn't mention, the reason why I really like Yup is I can use it both in the back end and in the front end. So I can use this same schema here in my front end when I have the user typing, so I can check the email and the password before they even send it to the server as well. So that's super cool and really nice. But that's it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching.